When I went in the service and when I finally went to Vietnam, it was after a year of training. I was a 19-year-old lieutenant, which if some of you are in ROTC, you know is unusual. Now, I thought I was going over for freedom and democracy. But what I learned was that if you killed a Vietnamese child, and the parents could prove that they weren't Viet Cong, and it was an accident, you would pay the parents of that child the equivalent of $60, which was about 690 piastres, which meant that that child's life was worth $60. Now, if you killed a father who ran the place, you know, and had to feed all of his children, they would pay the family $120, or the equivalent. And while I was running around the jungles of Vietnam, because I spent all of my time in the jungles, and it isn't like Rambo, believe me. One, nobody could carry weight like that in the jungle. You have to lose weight and get skinny. I was down to about 122 pounds, and I was fat. But while I was running around the jungle, we would find rubber plantations. And at the time, they would say, you're going to be going through a Michelin rubber plantation. And I thought when they said Michelin, that's a type of tree. And it wasn't until a time later when I came back and saw the Radial X commercials, you know, with the guy, the little tire man, that when they said Michelin, they meant those were owned by Michelin rubber. And I discovered that I wasn't in Vietnam for that child's life. I was in Vietnam so I could protect rubber trees that belonged to Michelin so that they could make Radial X's so someone could have cheaper tires on their new Oldsmobile. And that didn't quite make sense to me. But what really didn't make sense to me was that if a child died, we paid him $60. But if we destroyed a Michelin rubber tree, we paid them $600. The sap in that tree was worth 10 times the amount of money of that child, that baby's blood. And that didn't make sense to me, because I'd been raised right, and that didn't make sense. And then what I learned through the course of the period of Vietnam was that we were there supporting a corrupt dictatorship, and the people on the ground, the peasants in the field, didn't want us there. Oh, there was a certain segment of the Vietnamese population that wanted us there. The pimps wanted us there. The whores wanted us there. The people pushing drugs wanted us there. And the generals that were making money off of this wanted us there. But that average peasant that was out in the fields day in and day out trying to raise his family and scrape up an existence did not want us there. And I came home. And I lived. My nephew wasn't so lucky. He got drafted, and he was special to the service, too, because he couldn't pass the mental test. But see, they don't like to send rich people off to fight wars. I mean, maybe if you're going to sit back in Washington or the Pentagon, that's okay. But my nephew was unfortunate, and he was Mexican-American, and he wasn't quite as smart as other people who were going on to college. So they came up with a special program called Project 100,000. This was special by Johnson and by McNamara, where they took 100,000 kids a year who couldn't pass mental and physical tests, and they drafted them in the service, and they sent them to Vietnam as infantrymen. And they said they were doing them a favor because they would get job training. And my nephew should not have been in the field because he was a wonderful kid, but he just should not have been in the field. And he got killed during the Tet Offensive in 1968. A North Vietnamese soldier shot him through the throat, and he drowned in his own blood. 2 days later, we were able to recover the body, but it was too bloated after 2 days in the jungle in the sun, so we had to bring the body back, closed caskets. So I got a free ticket on my nephew's life, and then I got out of the service. And it didn't sit right with me, and at that time I joined an organization, a group that I still belong to, that I helped found, called Vietnam Vets Against the War. And the funny thing is that VVAW is the oldest Vietnam Vets organization in the country. 1967 it started on the East Coast. The other thing funny about it is that while in Vietnam, only 10% of the troops were combat, 75% of Vietnam Vets Against the War was combat. And we grew until we had over 50,000 members, and also are the largest of the Vietnam vet organizations. And I discovered something on coming back and working against the war and talking to high schools starting back in 1970. The other thing was I was watching my friends around me die as they came home, and we discovered something. We discovered that while we were in Vietnam, the U.S. government discovered and used something called Agent Orange, which is a defoliant. And this defoliant has something in it called dioxin. And dioxin is the most deadly thing known to man. The only thing more deadly than dioxin is botulism. It takes 3 parts per trillion, 3 parts out of a trillion to kill you. This thing is a carcinogen. It causes cancer. It alters your chromosomes, makes you have birth defects. And we discovered in 1971 that the Vietnamese, both our friends and our quote enemy, were starting to have a rate of deformities and birth defects among their children that was 6% of the total birth rate, which is unheard of. And the United States, through worldwide pressure, was forced to stop using it in Vietnam. But one thing that we didn't know was happening, and that was that it had affected men who had served in the field in Vietnam. So at this point, what Vietnam vets have discovered is that if they weren't killed in Vietnam, they have the good chance of possibly coming home and still dying from service in Vietnam. The only thing you can get from the federal government if you've got Agent Orange poisoning is a small disability check if you have chloracne. So if you're 39 years old and you got pimples like you're 13 and a skin problem, they'll give you $25 a month. But if you've got 2 children who have multiple birth defects due to exposure to Vietnam, or Agent Orange in Vietnam, you don't get 1 penny. So what does this have to do with you? Because presently what's going on is another situation in Central America or the Middle East. It's an awful lot like Vietnam. It's an awful lot like it because we're doing exactly the same things, or the government is, that they did when I went into service. And the worst part about it is, here in Chicago, we had 200 Vietnam vets, including 2 children, one age 9, one age 11, who will be dead before they're 16, who have poisoning from Agent Orange. The Assistant Secretary for the Air Force announced that they thought Agent Orange was fine and that they were planning to use it in Central America. And that means that Vietnam vets, if they've survived, now have a chance to watch their children die of it.